Welcome to Uncivil Disobedience, and this is your host, Chris Richards. My co-host, Kennedy, is going to be joining us a little later. They've had some personal issues they have to deal with right now, and I totally understand. I just don't want to talk about it unless Kennedy wants to. Our guest tonight is Melanie D'Arrigo, who I'm really happy to see because we are friends from the last election cycle, and she is running again, which makes me happy. He's running as a Democrat, which makes me a little less happy, but we'll talk about that later. And it is what it is. I understand why you run as a Democrat in New York. That's not a dig. So go ahead and introduce us. Assume that that my audience doesn't know who you are, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your campaign.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here tonight, Chris. It's really nice to be on, and it's nice to see you. Hello to your audience. My name is Melanie D'Arrigo. I'm running for Congress in New York's 3rd district, which is an interesting district. We're unique in the sense that we span 3 counties. So we're part of New York City and a very large chunk of the northern part of Long Island, so Nassau and Suffolk County. My opponent, my current congressman, he's the vice chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. Now, I suspect your audience knows about those folks in that caucus, but for those who don't, the Problem Solvers Caucus is a caucus that's evenly divided between very conservative Democrats and Republicans. Interesting fun fact, or not so fun fact, 4 of the Republicans in the caucus voted to overturn the election and were like semi-supportive of the insurrection. Post January 6th, the caucus welcomed 2 more Republicans into the caucus that voted to overturn the results of the election. This is a group that is routinely responsible for really just the worst legislation, right?
And I'll break in here because there's the perfect example. The Problem Solvers Caucus is responsible. Everybody remember back in the days when there was always talk about another shutdown coming along, and they were passing resolutions to fund the government almost on a monthly basis. And during one of those resolutions, while the calls to abolish or at least significantly cut ICE's budgets were ramping up, the Problem Solvers Caucus said to Nancy Pelosi, no, we're not funding the government unless you fund ICE in the concentration camps. And Nancy Pelosi did it.
That is unfortunately a very true story. I went to a town hall before I decided to run for office to get that explanation from my congressman, because as a mother, I have 3 kids, to see hear about what was going on at the border at the time. I did later go down and visit and see it with my own eyes, but at the time I hadn't been. But it was heartbreaking for me. So I went to this town hall and I raised my hand and I got called out and I asked a question: why did you vote to expand the detention centers? And of course, and this is another thing that's infuriating about the Problem Solvers Caucus, they use it as a shield and they tell you, well, I can't tell you how I voted, but that's how the caucus voted. So I had to go along with it, which is just such baloney.
Don't you wish the Progressive Caucus would talk like that?
We're going to get there. I'm an optimist, so I think we're going to get there. But yeah, it's interesting. When I pressed him on that particular piece of legislation, I later found out that he didn't even read the bill. Didn't even read it. I was talking to him and he's like, I don't think you're right. I'm like, 3% of that bill went to actual humanitarian aid. The rest of it went to expanding detention centers, funding ICE, funding Customs Border Patrol. And, he was like, I don't know. And I kind of was so frustrated. I said, well, did you even read it? And he kind of looked at me and I was like, oh God, the bar is low.
They don't usually.
Well, but
that goes to the ones we like as much as the ones we hate, sadly.
But you know what? Then someone on your staff had better damn well read that bill, especially when human lives are at stake, right? I mean, look, you don't want to read a bill to name a park after someone, whatever. When human lives are at stake, you better read that bill, or someone on your staff had better read that bill. And there's, they rolled back Dodd-Frank, reducing regulations on the banks that caused the housing crisis, and et cetera. So yeah, they're not a great caucus for sure. and they definitely detract and weaken any good bits for working families in pretty much anything. But more importantly, he's heavily corporate funded, my opponent. 98% of his donations in the last cycle came from big donors and corporate PAC special interests. As you know, Chris, I don't take a single cent of corporate PAC money. I don't believe policy should be for sale. And it's very frustrating that we have a system that allows legalized bribery. So, there's a lot of distinctions between us. He is very against Medicare for all. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for Medicare for all. I spent my career working in the healthcare space, building out well-being strategies for organizations and families. And I believe deeply in my bones that everybody deserves healthcare. And I actually have a plan this time around in this coming election, where when we talk about even Medicare for all, as amazing as it would be, it's really a sick care plan, right? It's not really a healthcare plan. So, I mean, what would it look like if we could imagine a country where we could actually provide a preventive healthcare plan, right? And I think that it bleeds into a lot of other spaces, right? Because it's going to mean things like creating more green spaces, making sure our schools are funded, making sure our kids are eating real food, right? There's such disparity all over this country between the quality of food that kids eat. Yes. And so what does that look like? So I'm really excited about that this time. And I'm hoping that if we can, spread that message around, as you know, that's how you push legislation, right? We almost have to take it further to normalize something. Although I would argue that the pandemic certainly has warmed a lot of folks to, not our representatives yet, but warmed the people of America to the idea of Medicare for all. And as you know, 70% of Americans support it.
It's true. And that was something that I thought that Congress could have done a better job of reminding people of, instead of refusing to even bring it to a vote.
Well, or how about bringing the insurance lobbyist plan of funding COBRA instead of paying for healthcare for all for everyone, which would have cost less.
Yeah, because
COBRA
is ridiculously expensive.
It's obscene. And I do know some people that have benefited, and, I'm happy that, they're getting their healthcare paid for. That's wonderful for them. But I mean, where are you at morally? That's the question we have to ask. When you have a choice of providing healthcare for some for a much higher cost versus providing healthcare for all for a less cost. It shows you, right? I mean, all of the money being pumped into politicians' coffers to not support Medicare for all and universal health care, it's working, right? And I think it's really important that we keep being loud about it and keep fighting. And, in the last congressional cycle, it was exciting to see so many progressives running. And I hope that we have that again this time as well, because something beautiful, I think, happened last time where many of us, supported each other. And I think we amplified each other, and we were able to, bring more of a national attention to issues that are important. So I'm hoping we can amplify that even more this time around.
I'm hoping that happens. I would love to see that happen. I do have some skepticism. I have to admit of the Democrats in general lately. You mentioned some of that. And I have to admit that it bothers me that even now, Pramila Jayapal was recently saying that, if we actually tried to force a vote on Medicare for all right now, we'd be making Kevin McCarthy House Speaker. Now, this is the leader of the Progressive Caucus explaining why we can't vote on Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem right to me.
No, I definitely would love to see Medicare for all brought to a vote. And obviously I'm very familiar with the Force the Vote movement. I do think, something that did worry me, because I've seen it here in New York, and I haven't looked at, the big picture to see what it would have looked like. But I do know there are there are representatives that I could see voting for it, knowing it was going to fail.
Yeah.
And then I think, yeah, for sure. And I think then we're in a similar situation where there are some representatives that co-sponsor a bill until it's up for a vote, right? So I don't know, you know, I think there, and like in those particular races, I think then it would be harder to get a challenger from the left to defeat them because they know they're not real champions of it. And I see this a little bit in my, you know, my current race where my opponent, you know, technically signed on to the Green New Deal resolution. He's technically signed on to Thrive, yet he champions only the corporate pieces of legislation that would support it. He later called the Green New Deal, you know, what did he say? It was a fairy tale or something like that, right? So this is someone who uses these pieces of legislation as cover. So he'll walk into a progressive room or, you know, speak to an organization that's progressive, and he'll say, I support the Green New Deal. I've seen him do this in the same day. I've been at several events, and then he'll walk in and be like, oh, well, we've got to tighten things up, you know, and it's a completely different message. So I think it's hard. But, you know, that is sort of aside from the fact that, like, what are the other ways, right? Because we know when we push legislation, when we build movements, we can't rely on one thing, right? We have to attack it from multiple levels. And so, you know, that I know that I spent those couple of months, you know, trying to organize within my state, you know, doing teach-ins and trying to spread the word that way. You know, and I think we need a multi-pronged strategy in order to push for it. You know, I know that there's going to be a big action in DC on the 24th. I'm going to try to get down there to go there. You know, we can't wait. So we'll see what happens, but we'll see what kind of pressure we can apply there as well.
Oh,
hey, Kennedy.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Kennedy.
I'm really angry.
No, I totally understand. I haven't said anything about what happened because I was waiting for you to decide what you wanted to say.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry I'm late. Melanie, I don't want to come in 10 minutes late and be all rude like this on you, someone I love and appreciate, but it's been a very terrible day. Unfortunately, someone close to me was assaulted in a politically motivated assault just a few hours ago. And they're okay, but I was just on the phone with them. And it's a very fascist situation. I don't know how else to describe it. It's really fascist. And I can't give all of the details, but I will just say this. The ex-soldier in question, who, if I am given permission to name and shame and ruin this guy's life, I will. I'm just waiting. Just saying. The ex-soldier in question shoved a small child for disrespecting the flag. A small child.
Oh my gosh.
To the ground, bruising him.
Oh my gosh.
This is the kind of shit that is going on in this country right now, while some people pretend like everything's fine, we're back to normal, it's all good. This is the third time in the last 4 years that someone close to me was attacked in a politically motivated assault.
Oh my gosh.
It's becoming increasingly common, and this is not, somehow this is just acceptable.
Is the child okay, Kennedy?
He is, but he's physically okay, but he's bruised and he's upset. He doesn't really even understand what happened yet. We're gonna sit down with him as a community of people that care about him to try to explain to him what this means, why it happened, you know, what kinds of things he can do about it in terms of like what kinds of justices he can potentially seek, because we want him to understand that he's not powerless here and that he has a right to want justice against this person. We want him to understand that.
Of course. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's like millennial lefties talking about. Yeah, it's like this kind of shit is just going on more and more and more in this country. And you know, the messed up thing is this guy was a soldier for our country out there murdering for our flag, and that's okay. But if I was to get really worked up and just fly off the handle, just being as upset as I really feel about it, I would get us all banned off of YouTube. You know, but like somehow he's allowed to hold all the power and all the cards that let him do this kind of violence. And, you know, he may just get away with this.
So, and this is something that gets to me, because for people to take the Pledge of the Allegiance so seriously is really would have really kind of been a joke to anyone our grandparents' age. Because did you know that the Pledge of Allegiance has only been the Pledge of Allegiance since 1942? Now, it was written in 1892. It's been around for a long time, but it was only formally adopted as the official Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag by Congress in 1942. So it's not even as old as the idea of men and women sitting together in the theater, men and women going to the bar together, which only slightly older than men and women, not as old as men and women going to the bar together, which started in the 1920s during Prohibition. You know, before Prohibition, men went to bars and women didn't. And during Prohibition, women started going to bars too, because the bars were crimes anyway, so they didn't have to worry about blue laws.
Double crime, who cares?
And then when Prohibition was lifted, women were in the habit of going to the bars too. And it was a huge cultural change. And that only happened in the 1920s. It was a completely different world before that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've still got a long way to go.
And the Pledge of Allegiance is a part of this modern women go to bars too world, and not part of the old, once upon a time women didn't go to bars world.
Now we just need to make sure women get paid as much as men. And then we'll get there.
Yes. And we also need to make sure that everybody gets paid a living wage, no matter where they're working.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to talk about something that was on Twitter. No, on Facebook, but it was shared on Twitter by someone else. This 14-year-old kid working full-time and overtime at Burger King. And his dad is just so happy about it.
In Georgia, right? Wasn't it in Georgia?
Yeah. And his dad was just so happy about his kid working at Burger King and making money and working overtime even. And getting all these hours in and working so hard. And I'm thinking to myself, here it comes. And then sure enough, so why should my kid who's just getting started out in life make the same blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh my gosh, he's using his kid working hard as a political argument against the minimum wage while denying his kid their childhood.
I'll tell you something. I grew up dirt poor. I started getting jobs at a young age, like a lot of poor kids. And even my parents, they might have encouraged me to get those jobs because they knew that I wanted to have things that other kids had that I could only have by earning my own money. But they still had the sense to, not glamorize it, make it clear that was the injustice that I was facing. And they're not even real leftists, but they still understood that, there was an injustice that we faced as poor people that they had to express to me. And I'll tell you the other thing. Anytime I did get paid really well, they were happy. They weren't like, oh, what? You overpaid our kid. Kennedy's 12. They don't need this much money. They were like, oh, shoot, you got paid that much for that? That's awesome. Go you, kid.
Oh gosh, yeah. I'm thinking back now. I grew up also. I didn't grow up with my parents, so we definitely did not have a lot of money at all. And so anytime I could get a job doing anything, whether it was like helping delivering papers or babysitting, I would do it. And then one of my uncle's friends, they had asked me to babysit. And they had 4 children, and they paid me $2 an hour. And I would be there for 8 or 9 hours. And then they would give me these lists. Well, can you do the laundry? Can you clean the house? And I would walk in and it was disaster. And I would take care of 4 kids. I would clean a house. I would cook them food. And then I was like, this is awful. This is and for $2 an hour, right? That's how poor we were, that I was like subjecting myself to this awful, awful thing just so I could have a little pocket money. But I think that's a good point. We talk about this, the $15 minimum wage, and as infuriating as that was to somehow disappear, $15 in some places may be a living wage, but it's not in a lot of places.
Not in New York, is
not
it?
And not in New York, where I live. For a single person, a minimum wage, a true living wage, would be like close to $20 an hour, and then that's just for a single person, not for a family, right? So it wouldn't even scratch the surface here in New York. But I think it's a really important conversation. Inequality continues to explode. Wages have been stagnant since the 70s, and the very, very wealthy just accumulate more and more and more wealth. I was encouraged to hear, I should say, quick caveat, in New York State, we just had a huge campaign to pressure our legislature to start taxing wealth the same way so investment wealth, right? We know really wealthy people, they don't make their money from income. They make their money from investments in their portfolios, and it's not taxed the same. So I'm encouraged to start hearing this conversation on the federal level, but we need to do a whole lot more.
Oh, definitely.
And we're also struggling against the weight of massive inflation that isn't being talked about enough in all this too, because you can put minimum wage as high as you want, but if you don't regulate anything else, then my rent's going to be $5,000 tomorrow, and a gallon of milk is going to be $80. And that's increasingly, that's what we're seeing anyway. It's already happening. My partner and I were just talking earlier about the fact that, she makes almost as much money just herself now as we made together 10 years ago when we first got together. And we're not that much more comfortable, it's really not making a huge difference because the price of everything has gone up so much in the 10 years that we've been together.
This is why Eisenhower signed off on that 99% top marginal tax rate.
I have to share a story here. Oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead. I'll tell you.
Those tax rates, those high tax rates for rich people, didn't collect a lot of extra revenue because rich people didn't make that much money back then. But the reason they worked was because they acted as maximum wage controls. Mm-hmm. In Eisenhower's day, the president of GM was making like $120,000 a year. Now you compare that to what the president of a major corporation makes now. And that's because of the difference in the taxes. Mm-hmm. And so those benefits at the top have exploded out of control at the same time we stopped taxing the top.
Mm-hmm. I want to share a quick story, if that's okay. I think this really puts it into crystal clear perspective. I have a sort of an acquaintance-like relationship with this woman. I sort of only know her in an ancillary way. She's sort of on the outskirts of political workings where I live. And I was having a conversation with her, and she was saying to me, I'm excited that you're running, but I don't know, that whole progressive thing, I'm more of a conservative. So I said to her, well, what issues are important to you? She first and foremost, she says, well, reproductive rights, of course. And I said, okay, well, that's universally shared among, lefties and, I think more moderate Democrats for the most part. And then she said, what really bothers me? Inequality. And I'm like, yeah. And then she tells me a story. Now, this is a woman who, had her own advertising company, lives in a really expensive area, has a beautiful house. And she tells me, get this. Well, I was in the Hamptons, which, for the Hamptons are kind of where the rich and famous play. And she says, I was riding my bike with my friend, and we're riding through the streets, and we were looking at these houses that were for sale. And she's like, we're looking, and the house was $60 million. She looks at me, she goes, now who can afford a $60 million house? She's like, it was crazy. And I'm sitting here thinking, you're one of the richest people I know. And if you think that's crazy, like we're really in trouble here, you know? And I think that's what's starting to happen, that there, even amongst like the 1%, it is getting segmented out in such a drastic way.
This is really important to understand, is that class always seeks to make more and more distance between the people at the top and the people at the bottom in any division of the class structure. So obviously the people at the very top and the people at the very bottom, well, you don't need to do much extra. You've already got that huge difference. The people, the rich folks are happy. But that's where you start to get, but then when you start getting into the, what we would call rich, the millionaires club. So you understand that when politicians and business people talk about the middle class, they don't mean the people we think of as the middle class. They mean the bottom tier of millionaires, people who make like $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year.
No, this is actually so funny because I try to tell people this all the time, and they look at me like I'm a complete, like my head has just turned into like a frog, you know, like I'm just like I'm speaking another language, but like the Hollywood elite are like the middle class, like the people that still have to work all the time to maintain their existence, but live in the relative comfort of what we think of as wealth because we don't have anything down here on the bottom.
We all know
the actual middle class.
we all know who. Oh, it's already gone out of my head. Well, we all know that there are some folks in Hollywood who lost their health care because of the SAG-AFTRA rules changes that basically said if you don't make so much actually working in show business a year, you don't get paid for your health benefits. And so people who are retired but still paying union dues for their health care still have to pay their union dues but don't get health care anymore. People who were not working enough to be to act full time, but who were getting health care from paying their union dues, and so they didn't have to get health care at their day job, they don't get health care anymore. Now remember, we were being told during the presidential primary, no, Medicare for all is going to be so bad for people in unions who already get union health care. So, well, it'll be really good for people in unions if the union takes their health care away for some reason. And I mean, I hate to trash unions. Unions do a lot of good, but I mean, it just like the Democratic Party isn't now what it was back in the day. Unions aren't now what they were back in the day.
Yeah, and some of them have the same problem where if you provided universal health care for everyone, the union wouldn't know what to do with itself.
Well, look, there's also room for them to step up in others, right? For so long, and perhaps this is why they're so weakened. It's all become built. All of the negotiations are structured around healthcare, right? Because those costs are always going up. So what does that mean? The union workers' wages are pretty stagnant as well. And I think as a society, we really have to move past this place of, well, I worked for it and you didn't, so I don't want to give to you because I feel like that means less for me. Somehow we have to reorient ourselves to the thinking that, some for all, giving to all will help raise all of us, right? It's like all boats rise, right? And I think that I've had some successful conversations with many union members about this who felt, very similar to what you're saying. Well, I don't know, my union, my healthcare is good. Let us all have good healthcare, and then let your union negotiate for better wages, and you would do so much better. And not only would you do better, but the generations after you would do better. I don't know what it is about us, but Americans, where we don't want to give to people.
There's a big strike going on now in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
The Warrior Met coal strike. 1,100 coal miners are on strike down there. I have been following it because I follow some weird fringe websites that have been doing a report on actually kind of how corrupt the union has been, and how the union is not doing right by the workers, and how the union has been very specifically not involving other work sites. I mean, so this is the UMWA, United Mine Workers of America. Now, this is the original industrial union. I don't know if folks who are watching know the difference. So there's a difference between a trade union and an industrial union. A trade union says all these people who do roughly this same kind of job, whether it's cigar makers or plumbers or electricians, all those people who do roughly the same kind of skilled labor, regardless of where they work or who they work for, as long as they do the same kind of labor, they're in our union. And it's built around what you know, and it's based on the old craft and trade guilds from the Middle Ages almost. So it's not really something new or radical. They take care of their members, but originally their job was to set standards even more than it was to look after people's interests. And looking after people's interests in the labor movement grew as more trades joined the union, and more things that people were really working for other people and not just working for themselves became skilled laborers. Because machinists worked in factories most of the time, whereas the original cigar makers in the Cigar Makers Union were artists who made their cigars by hand, not in factories. Though by the time the union started to become important and the AFL was being formed, now they were working in cigar factories. But it was still a skilled job. And the industrial union instead was the point was to unionize everyone who worked in an entire industry: mining, steelworking, pick your industry, so that you could go on an industry-wide strike and get exactly what you wanted from all the employers in the industry at once, because you had the ability for the whole industry to go on strike. So, except these 1,100 miners at Warrior Met Coal in Alabama don't have a whole industry on strike behind them. They're striking by themselves. So what's changed? Well, since about the 70s and 80s, a whole bunch of unions have been more and more agreeing to what they call a selective strike clause, which stops them from doing things like going on a solidarity strike at another site for the same company. So because these things are in their contracts, and because they're obeying the rules in a way that unions never historically have, they're really not doing right by the people who are on strike. And one of the union people was actually making an excuse. Well, if the UMWA paid all the people on strike full wages, we'd lose up. We deplete all our assets. And 2 weeks' wages is not going to make the United Mine Workers of America go bankrupt.
No. And if it is, then y'all don't have your house in order.
And even if it were, what is the point of a union having assets that it is not going to use for a strike in the interest of its workers? I mean, unions aren't supposed to be investment concerns that exist to make money.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make a lot of strong points there. We certainly see that here too, where there's a lot of disparity between union members and union leadership, right? And
Yeah.
it's a concern of mine that I've had, whereas a lot of the members of unions, at least where I live, they align more to progressive values, but oftentimes their leadership, they'll hold true to the incumbent because that's where the relationship is. And it becomes very, not that unions are always political, but it does become more about the relationship than investing in their union members. And I think that needs to be corrected because it's just not a good road to continue down at all to help working class people.
I think some people got a little bit too easily tricked into thinking that, like, actually bargaining at the table with these corporations was possible, useful, desirable, etc. I just want to say, like, unions shouldn't be giving concessions to corporations. Just period, full statement. The purpose of your union is to get concessions from your job. It is to force your job into a corner and make them do something for you. And the way that you do that is to remind them who works there. The fact that, the CEO isn't coming down to do hundreds of people's jobs in the factory if you all decide that you're not doing it tomorrow, right? The union should not be making concessions about here's when we'll strike, here's what we'll do. The minute that a union starts making those kinds of concessions, it has basically ceased to function, because you should only ever be making demands with your union. That's the point. That's the entire point, is that this corporate structure doesn't give a fuck about you, and you need something that does.
I wish every union in America, and I hate to say it because they're pampered millionaires, I wish every union in America were the Major League Baseball Players Association when it's time to renew a contract. Because since there has been a Major League Baseball Players Association that was able to legally strike, there has been a strike or a walkout almost every contract year. There's only been a couple of times where the contract has come up for renegotiation and there hasn't been a strike or a walkout. And so if every union could do that, if every union could have that discipline to go on strike every time it's time to renew the contract and get the contract they feel they deserve, that would make a huge difference. But instead, you've got you agree to give up the right to strike. No. We've got a no strike agreement. In return for our no strike agreement, we've been promised this and this and this. Well, yeah, but your no strike agreement means you have no power to enforce that if they break their promise.
And what do you know? They always do.
Well, it's like the one-sided bargains. I mean, in any state that's employment at will, basically you have the right to quit at any time and your employer has the right to fire you at any time, except your employer demands that you give them 2-week notice. So you have the right to quit 2 weeks from any time. Now, you don't actually have to give 2 weeks notice. Lots of people I know say say you shouldn't, that you should just leave one day. But no, most places want that 2 weeks notice, and they won't hire you again if you don't give it. And as much as I hate to say, sometimes you shouldn't ever go back to a job, and it's true. It's just sometimes you have to go someplace where they'll hire you again. But the employer doesn't have to worry about that. Even if I really were serious about never coming to work for them again, they don't care. There are 500 million other people they could hire instead.
Yeah.
That's
why there's no incentive to solve homelessness or food insecurity or any of these other issues, right? Because that's the boot that keeps you motivated to take whatever crummy job that Chris just quit because it was too awful and the working conditions were really bad. Well, I'm taking it today because I'm starving. And so it doesn't matter that they haven't improved the conditions because someone more desperate came along, right?
And that's the worst part of being poor, is having to take a job that somebody else quit because it sucks so much. I've had to do that. I know that other people have had to do that. I was once, when I couldn't afford to do it, I lost my temper and walked off a job and didn't give my 2 weeks notice. I said, hey, I finished putting up the truck for you like you wanted, but I'm not putting up another truck by myself here ever again. I quit.
I walked out of a restaurant job kind of in a similar situation where I showed up in the morning and the kitchen was dirty because there was one chef in particular that was just a big mess of a person, but somehow got away with it all the time. I have my suspicions about that. That's a whole other thing.
So,
but I just came into the dirty kitchen and I called my boss and I said, "Are you going to send anyone in to help me with this?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, then you're coming in to deal with it because I'm out of here."
Well, that was at a Wendy's, and I opened, and the openers were just me and an old lady with a limp. And the old lady with the limp was the hardest working person in the whole place. But she was not in a position to help with the truck. She would help with almost anything else, but she just could not physically help with the truck. She was an old lady with a limp. So on the days where the truck had deliveries for the freezer or the stock room, I had to put all that stuff up by myself. If I was really lucky, the manager or assistant manager who was there that day would help, but I wasn't always that lucky. And, it gets tiresome after a while unloading a truck and putting everything away by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked at a pet shop when I was in high school, and I'm a huge animal lover. I'm a sucker for a puppy, and I was so excited to get the job because I love just petting the dogs, and I love to go to the pet shop as a customer just to see the animals, and then it took me about, 2 hours on the job to realize that the owners of the store were just awful, awful humans. They were yelling at the employees. They would yell at me. They weren't taking care of the dogs. And it got to a point where I knew I had to quit, but I was so scared that if I quit, the dogs would be mistreated. I would often just wash them on my lunch break just because they were not cleaning them properly. But ultimately, I did end up having to leave the job because the working conditions were just so awful.
So I guess you do understand why some of the people in the Trump administration were allegedly so worried about leaving because he was going to push the button. Okay. I
sympathize in my heart,
I can see that now. Okay. I've had a hard time picturing that, but now I picture you not wanting the owner of the pet store to mistreat the puppies if you're not there. Now I can see why people didn't want to quit working for Trump so immediately.
Right.
I can see Trump mistreating the puppies.
100%.
Yeah, no kidding. And there are situations like that where you end up sort of half defending a bad person because you're really trying to defend a good person that's in their line of sight, or something, or in this case, a good puppy. So yeah, it's.
Well, there were all those wonderful arguments during the election that we couldn't vote third party because, if Biden doesn't win, it's just going to be a disaster. We'll have 4 more years of Trump, and there's going to be so much harm reduction under Biden. And so this is the point where I want to say, because I haven't said it on the air yet, and it's been bottled up. You all understand that unaccompanied minor is a euphemism, right? There's no such thing as an unaccompanied minor at the U.S. border in the way that the Obama administration or the Biden administration wanted you to picture an unaccompanied minor. And it really sinks home when you get into an argument about closing the concentration camps with some of these Well, we have to take care of the kids. We can't just turn the kids loose in the U.S. without anybody to watch over them. It's like, so do you really think that they got here from El Salvador totally unassisted without any sort of escort or help? So when the Obama administration called someone an unaccompanied minor, what they meant is they were coming with an older sibling or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle. And we're not. And yes, that's exactly what we mean, Pearl. Yes. Yes. An older cousin, an aunt, an uncle, a brother, a sister. And when they got to the border, if the other person wasn't an adult, they would be separated. If the other person couldn't prove that they were immediate family, which is they didn't have paperwork to prove they were a brother or sister, or they were an aunt or uncle instead of the parents, separated, locked up separately. So when we talk about family separations under Trump, it's important to understand that family separations were already happening under Obama, and they are still happening under Biden. Unaccompanied minor is a euphemism for a child who was separated by the guardian they were traveling with who wasn't their parent.
Also, can we talk about, okay, I'm sure that someone can find, a 14-year-old who truly came to the border alone with no one, was picked up by our government, etc. If that 14-year-old was capable of that, they're capable of looking after themselves to a large extent.
Let's pretend.
And let's just be real about the fact that a lot of liberals, they would rather have a known horror going on than an unknown anything, even if that unknown thing is likely better. We know what happens in these concentration camps, whatever you want to call them, at the border is really bad and is traumatizing and ruining people's lives, and that the people who go through this system, some of them are never ever going to be okay again.
And that's just the normal system. We're not assuming that they're getting sent to Homestead where, right, I quote, staff on child sex was happening on a weekly basis.
Right.
Trump closed Homestead. Trump closed Homestead because it was so bad. Trump closed Homestead. Biden opened it up. It was one of the first things he did after he had settled into the office for a few days.
But even assuming you have the best case scenario being processed by this system, it's still going to traumatize the fuck out of people. It's still going to make their lives a lot harder moving forward for no reason in particular. And there's this whole mentality that somehow that's better than these kids who have lived on the street probably their whole life in terrible situations, just continuing to do that. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's good. Okay, let's get those kids off the street in a way that's actually productive, sure. But saying that it's better for them to be tormented in a cage than to be wandering the streets, well, that's all these kids have ever known. And if you really think that that's better, you just don't know poverty, because kids who have had to survive poverty, we get by. And
hold on a second. Let's also just take it a step back, right? Because we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, right? So that should not be the best we can do. Like,
no,
and no, that should not be the best that we can do. There has been such a lack of enthusiasm and motivation to come together to really legislate what a humane path to immigration would look like. And that is where we need to be focused. I agree with you, Chris. We need to close every damn one of these concentration camps. I went down to the border, I guess it was I guess this summer, it'll be 2 years ago. Yep. When I had gone down, we were getting calls from friends who were in Texas and El Paso, and they were saying, please come help. The churches are overrun. There was one shelter down there, it was overrun. They needed help. So we raised a bunch of money. We raised $10,000 in our community, and we got our own tickets down. We went down, and it was so bizarre. Within 1 week, El Paso just cleared out. There was nobody there. We were like, what's going on? And it was when Trump decided to amp up that MPP program, right? Which sounds, oh, that sounds good. Migrant Protection Program. Oh, that sounds pretty good. No, that just meant they deported everybody and dropped them off in the streets of Mexico, which was not a particularly safe area. So we crossed the border. We ended up just like sort of hustling down there to try to find out how we can help people, because we had just raised all this money to help people. We ended up crossing over the footbridge, like packing suitcases with all kinds of, feminine products, shampoo, all kinds of stuff, toys for the kids. And we went over and got to meet people and talk to people. And it was heartbreaking to hear the stories. I don't know what people think when they, oh, these people are coming in, these people. They're just like us. They're just like us. They just we won the Born in America lottery, and they did, right? And to hear them talk, right? Not all of them could speak English, and my Spanish is very poor. But some of my friends were fluent in Spanish, and they were translating, and they were telling us, well, the gang activity, they attacked my son. They were coming for me. They murdered my husband. Yep. There's no food. These people are not coming like, oh, let's go. They are literally fleeing for their lives.
And they wouldn't have left if they didn't feel like they had to.
Well, yes, and we could talk about America's involvement in destabilizing South America as well, right? So if we're going to, be accountable, then the very least we can do is take the time in good faith and put together a humane immigration plan. I think this is one of the biggest stains on our country, and I think generations from now, when they read about this in the history books, if it makes it in, this is just one of our largest atrocities on our own soil. It's absolutely abhorrent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And it's been ongoing for longer than any of us have been alive. That's the part they don't want to talk about. It is an ongoing atrocity on the border since basically the end of World War II. Yeah. Before World War II, there was no border the way there is now. There were stations where the Mexican army had people stationed. There were stations where the U.S. Army had people stationed, and they patrolled the border and they made sure that the other side wasn't invading and all this other stuff. But you didn't pull up to a kiosk with a guy standing there and asking you if you had anything to declare. You just went across. There was nobody stopping you, nobody asking questions. It was defended, but not constantly guarded the way it is now. There were lots of places in Juarez and El Paso back in the day where you could basically cross over from one city to the other in the space. Oh,
I can tell you it was even more than that, because here in New Mexico, down by the town of Deming, there's a town in Mexico called Palomas that I've spent a bunch of time, and they have festivals that take place partially on both sides of the border. And some of those festivals have simply died out because it's such a logistical nightmare. Yes. They used to have parades that would start on one side and go to the other, and it was a shared cultural exchange, and no one policed that parade. The parade didn't stop in the middle and a bunch of guys with guns, check every parade float. No, that wasn't the way it was. And even just the border itself was not even strictly defined. It was just, here's the last town in the U.S. Here's the first town in Mexico. Here's the last town in Mexico. Here's the first town in the U.S. Where's the border? Somewhere in between those things. Well, I don't know.
Or in the case of Mexicali and Calexico, right in the middle of town.
It's interesting, and I don't know if it's still like this, but when I went down to El Paso, one of the things that had changed under the Trump administration was that they moved the checkpoint. So it was in the middle of the footbridge between Juarez and El Paso, right? So normally you would be able to go to the border checkpoint and ask for asylum, but they were stopping you. And if you didn't have a passport, they wouldn't let you pass. Therefore, you could not get to the border to ask for asylum, which I thought was particularly cruel.
Yes.
Yeah, no kidding. And these rules, they aren't just affecting the southern border anymore. They're starting to affect the towns that are right on the northern border. It's becoming this thing where, you know, as they implement these increasingly draconian policies for immigration patrol, you know, immigration customs and border patrol, these entities, once they get that power and they start abusing it, eventually they start abusing it everywhere. They don't just abuse the people that they were supposed to abuse. They abuse everyone, because that's what they, you know, these people do when you just give them a stick, you put them in a violent culture, like you're saying, because we know that these cultures of law enforcement are really violent. And it's worth noting that it's like anyone who lives in any border town in the United States is starting to get harassed. And even people that live on the coast are starting to experience things that...
And it's worth noting that the Border Patrol is the worst of the federal law enforcement agencies when it comes to culture. It's worse than many, not all, but many police departments. Even back before the consolidation in the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, the Border Patrol was still being accused of having Nazi culture under Bill Clinton. And that was before all the draconian rules changes that gave ICE and the Border Patrol so much more power after the Department of Homeland Security came into being and ICE came into being. And that's the other one. People who say, well, you can't abolish ICE. How would we do without ICE? 2002. They passed the law in 2002. So many years without ICE.
And even if you really thought immigrant crime was the worst thing that has ever happened to this country, the statistics for that type of crime did not change because of ICE. So even if you truly believed, and for the record, if you believe this, you're trash. But even if you truly believed it, it's not doing the job. Like it's not changed anything for the better, only for the worse, period. No one has benefited.
Well, what's ICE's mission? Oh, this is good. It's stumping people. What's ICE's mission?
Well, there are, I'm trying to remember now. So ICE, there was 2 divisions, right? Or was that Customs and Border Patrol? I have to So
ICE basically has one job. Well, not one job, there's a few, but ICE's core mission is to manage what they call high security immigrants, which basically means ICE is supposed to be going after people they suspect of being terrorists. Mm-hmm. That was the whole justification behind ICE.
There's more than one division now, right? So there's technically still this small division that is in charge of making sure there's no terrorism or drug traffickers. From what I understand, that tiny division of this bastardized organization now, they want to be separated. They don't want to be associated. From what I have heard.
But everything that has ever been done to ICE has been done under the excuse of keeping us safe from terrorists. I don't know if you remember, it's a while ago now, but in 2012, a Republican presidential candidate named Tom Tancredo from Colorado ran this awful primary commercial, whose the only purpose of filming it was so that YouTube and news stations would run it for free. It's one of those awful ads that you're never going to actually pay to put on TV, but you make because somebody else will run it for free and you won't have to pay to put it on TV. But basically, it's this anonymous person who you never see sneaking a bomb into a mall. ending with, oh yeah, we got to secure our borders. So in the long history of U.S. and Mexico border relations, most of the terrorist attacks, per se, have been people from the U.S. going south into Mexico, robbing a bank, and coming back to the States. And so with that in mind, it seems like if you really wanted to fight terrorism, the U.S.-Mexico border is not the ideal place to do it.
No, I wouldn't think so.
But everything that has ever been done with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, of whom ICE has become the tail that wags the dog, is supposedly to keep us safe from terrorism. So when you think of why children are in concentration camps under three U.S. presidents now, let's give Obama his fair share of the blame too. When we think about how children have been in concentration camps under 3 U.S. presidents, consider that it's to keep us safe from terrorism. And then consider how easy, because we love to go after other countries for the things that we do ourselves. Consider how easy it is for another country, as well-meaning as our country might be, as civilized as we think our country might be, might end up with a bunch of Muslims in prison in one of its provinces and have to insist that no, it's not committing a genocide. They just have a bunch of terrorists in prison. And then we say, well, no, that's silly. Except that's exactly what the U.S. is doing. We're fighting terrorism.
And me, I love to always compare apples to apples. If we're going to go there is a much clearer path for how you get out of a camp in China than how you get out of a camp here. True. Let's just be real about that, because our obsession, especially since the Bush era, is to create these situations of indefinite detention with no charges, no like real easy recourse or just like way to get out. If you are stuck in one of these concentration camps at our border, there is no clear path for you to leave that facility, period. There just is not. And that alone should tell you something about the nature of it. If it was truly there to help these people, then from the second they arrive, there would be a clear path to leave, because that would be the point.
Kennedy, there is a clear path to leave when they deport them back to Mexico.
But even that isn't, there are some people who are being held in facilities that would love to just be let out anywhere at this point and can't even get that.
Right. That is absolutely true. Although they are also, I guess a year or two ago, they were using that as an expedited method to get folks back to Mexico. I think, Chris, I think you're going to like what I'm about to say, and I don't mean it to stir the pot, but, we were so outraged when this was happening under Donald Trump. We were so outraged. I think in my area where I live, there were protests almost every week. Close the camps, stop separating children from families. And now we don't even hear about it on the news. And I think that is a real disservice, and it's a real missed opportunity. And it's why I think, we get so frustrated with mainstream Democrats sometimes, because it can't be bad for one, but good for the other, right? We have to be able to look at policy clearly, logically, independently, and say, okay, well, it doesn't matter who is supporting this. Is it good policy or bad policy, right? Because this is a policy choice. What we're doing, we're ruining lives, and it is a policy choice on behalf of America. And I think we're all responsible for it. If we're going to sit here tight-lipped because quote unquote, your guys in office, that is never going to move the needle. So I think we really need to get enraged again, and we need to start putting pressure on.
I'm going to ask kind of a tough question here because this sort of segues into it very nicely. There are people who feel exactly that way. And because of that, they've made tough choices like, well, they're not going to vote for a Democrat again because they feel like a lot of people they supported in primaries, whether it's congressional candidates or Bernie Sanders, they feel a lot of people they supported in primaries sort of sold them out and supported Biden. They feel very betrayed by how many people sort of went right to Biden. They don't, especially now that Biden has turned out to be as bad as he has been. And people who look at this and see progressives in Congress say, well, he's so much better than we thought he was going to be. They get very cynical very quickly about the progressives in Congress, and it colors the way that they see other people who are running as progressives. And I'll be blunt. There's a system that they use to break people. AOC actually told The Intercept about it, and they wrote about it while she was a freshman and before they got to her. They put freshman Congress people in a room 40 hours a week and basically make you a telemarketer as your primary job. And your job is to raise money for the party. And you're supposed to raise so much for the party and so much for yourself, not for your campaign, but for your leadership PAC, which is to donate to other congressmen. And so much for, and then finally at the end, after all that, so much for your campaign fund and for other Congress people's actual campaign funds. And so if you're doing that enough, it doesn't matter whether you're taking dirty money or not. You're in a situation where they're making you ask for it over and over again for them and for other people. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, well, I think, first and foremost, the dynamics of that, you have to understand what else is in play, right? So what does that mean? Does that mean they don't get put on committee assignments? What does that mean, right? I think many of the progressives that ran, well, firstly, I should say, nobody's perfect, right? We're all imperfect people. I think many of the progressives, if not all of them, they ran because they supported change. I believe that. Have they made mistakes? Sure. Yes, they have. But I think it's also important to remember that they're people. I think in particular, AOC gets raised to this goddess-like stature because so many people believed in her, Bernie Sanders as well. And I think that that's a trap because there is no one person coming to save us. There is no one person that is going to wave a wand and get it all done. I really see it more as a community effect, right? We need to push from the outside. We need to push from the inside. We need to get more people in Congress. And, that's a terrible story, what you're saying. I knew that there were, there are certain requirements. Like, for example, if you want to chair a committee, many of them come with a price tag. You don't just get appointed to a committee. Some cost $400,000 that you have to raise. Some cost $1 million. And I think that just furthers a broken system. Strategically, how do we change that? I think there's power in numbers. I'm not sure if the Progressive Caucus is big enough to change. Maybe they are. But if we elect more progressives, my hope would be that we could band together and kind of do one of these.
Well,
because
I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
With the words band together, I have to push back.
You can push back.
They have made it very clear, and by they, I mean progressives in Congress, they made it very clear that no, they vote alone. Those were Cori Bush's words. Everybody votes alone. And that's telling.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at their votes, you can see that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
The Progressive Caucus has never shown any sort of unity in actually sticking together on any sort of progressive issue.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the part that makes me the angriest. This is what I think about now every time somebody says that AOC is better than Joe Crowley, or that Jamal Bowman is better than Elliot Engel.
Mm-hmm.
I supported Jamal Bowman. I supported AOC. Obviously, I thought they were better than Elliot Engel and Joe Crowley. That's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
The point is in the degree. And I think it's safe to say that on the recent bill to increase the budget of the Capitol Police, that Joe Crowley, Elliot Engel, and John Conyers Jr., had he won instead of Rashida Tlaib, would have all have voted yes to raise the budget of the Capitol Police. Jamal Bowman, AOC, and Rashida Tlaib voted present. If any one of them had voted no instead of present, the Capitol Police budget doesn't get raised. That bill loses.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, all three of them voted present. So when somebody tells me what a big improvement they are, my response is, how much an improvement is present over yes?
Yeah, look, I think, as I said, I don't think that any one person is the be all end all. I would like to see more coalescing. They're obviously still a minority caucus. I mean, what I can tell you from, my personal motivation.
Which caucus is bigger, Problem Solvers or the Progressive Caucus? I'm curious.
Well, how many members does the Progressive Caucus have now?
I think it's 90 some.
Oh, okay. I didn't know it was that high. But are they all really progressive? See, I don't know. Like,
that's a
litmus test, right?
They're not.
No. That's a different story.
So it's interesting, right?
Like the terrible people in that caucus. Oh my God.
The Problem Solver Caucus has rules. I don't know what the Progressive Caucus rules are. And if they, there's a certain percentage of votes. If how they vote, then they all vote the same way. That's in their rules. So yeah, there's power in that, and I think that's the point you're making, right?
So let's raise the next question.
Yeah.
Let's assume that from the way they vote, that's not in the Progressive Caucus's rules. Why not?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Let's assume from the way they vote that there's no, we have to vote as a caucus rule.
Oh, why not?
Progressive Caucus's rule.
I'm not in the Progressive Caucus right now, but I mean, I think all of that, I don't know what the rules are. I would be interested to look it up. Are you familiar with if they have rules?
I looked over some of the new rules that they made public when Pramila became sole caucus chair and they dropped Pocan from his caucus leadership role. Which I have to say, in fairness to him, I have respect for Mark Pocan for being one of the very few people in Congress to be extremely consistent on speaking up for Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also a shill who was selling membership in the Progressive Caucus for donations. And that's one of the reasons there are so many people in it who are not reliably progressive.
Well, I mean, the only thing we can do is hope to change that, right? Or create a true progressive caucus. They're creating caucuses all the time, right? I mean, it's really about building power.
Something that I have thought we've needed for a long time. I doubt there are any Republicans looking to join it anytime soon. But one of the things I've thought we've needed for a while was a bipartisan, well, not bipartisan, a nonpartisan, and I'm just going to use the scariest word because it's what Republicans are going to call them anyway, a nonpartisan socialist caucus, which, anybody, Democrats, Republicans, if a Green wins, a Green can join. Something that really is for people who believe the same thing and who are willing to back it up in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things I've wondered for a while, I mean, Bernie Sanders was willing to start the Progressive Caucus when it was just him and one other guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets lost sometimes in our modern drumbeat of we've got to elect more progressives. We got to elect more progressives.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. But Bernie Sanders and one other guy were starting their own caucus by themselves. Why don't we have people in office who are willing to do that?
I wish I had that answer for you. I don't know.
You have a built-in answer. You can say if you're willing to back it up, because I haven't been elected yet.
Well, look, I'd like to believe that, most folks, and I'm going to use the word progressive because those are the folks that I see actually fighting for people, right? Or people first candidates, however you want to term them. I don't really care what label is on them, as long as they're purely running to fix things, to fix this country, to serve people. I do believe that most people at least start out that way. I guess the question is, how do we keep them that way, right? And this system is so broken. Like, one thing I have always said, and I know other candidates like this too, but we know it's very hard when you're running a grassroots campaign to win. It's even harder if you're a woman. I think they say the average woman has to run 2.9 times before she's elected. And I said to my husband, I said, look, I need you to know we're going to put all this work in, and I might only be there for 2 years. And he was like, well, why would you only be there for 2 years? And I said, because I don't want to do it and become part of a broken system. I can't do that. I can't be pushed and pulled and manipulated, and because that's otherwise, what the hell's the point? There's no reason, in my opinion, to run for office if you're not going to use that finite amount of time, whether it's 2 years or 8 years. That's an incredible position, incredible platform to educate and to push for change. And I think it's your responsibility to do everything in your power to do so. Now, full well knowing you're going to, what you put out there, you're going to get back, right? And I think we see this in anything in life, any industry. When you're the one that's rocking the boat, there's going to be a lot of people that try to throw you over, right? So I do believe there are a lot of candidates pushing for the right reasons. And I met so many of them in the last cycle. I hope some of them will join me and run again. But we have to try, Chris, right? We have to try.
So I can tell you that several people are already officially running again. And so I don't have any problem saying these names on the air because they're already running again. But Salem Snow and Jason Call and Mark Gamba and Amanda Seaby are all running again. And that's just the people I can remember right now.
That's great. I didn't know Amanda. I'll have to reach out to Amanda. I didn't know she was running again.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Also, one more of our favorites that Melanie, I know that you know well, is running again, but I don't think I'm allowed to say that yet.
Oh, okay. Maybe a DM or something.
Yeah, I will.
I have at least one I know who's running again who I can't talk about either. They also said when I spoke to them about it, they were determined to accomplish something, even if it was only one term. So that's one other person who's willing to make it only 2 years. So that's the two people it takes for a new caucus.
There you go. I mean, it's hard, as you know. Look at what we see each cycle, right? We don't see a lot of progressives winning. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think we're certainly waking people up. I also think, and I assume that your viewers understand this as well, this moment that we're in history is very unique, right? The last 4 years of Trump, I mean, everybody in America, well, everyone that wasn't a Republican, even some Republicans and everyone left of that was horrified every day. But right now, I think there are way too many people kind of putting their feet up and saying, oh, but things are on their way. They're on their way. And I think that that's a dangerous place to be. We see the right organizing all over the country. We saw it with the school board elections. I'm sure you guys saw some of that with critical race theory and all that nonsense. So they're organizing in a very big way. Trump is trying to flex again as well. So there's still the very real danger of that or worse coming back, in 2024. But aside from that, right, like let's remove all the evil and the scary bits away. We're in a moment in history where we can actually affect positive change. This is like a once in a generation opportunity where we can rebuild this country. We can invest in a national jobs program. We can try to counteract our climate crisis as best we can. We can provide healthcare. Like imagine being that generation, the generation that says nobody's going to be homeless anymore. Everyone's going to get health care, clean water for all to drink. Like that would be one hell of a legacy, right? And that's what motivates me every day. So that's where I'm focused. And I can't wait for you to tell me who those folks are that are your favorites that are running so we can form our little caucus when we get to DC. You don't have to tell me on the air. It's okay.
Well, there are some people. We've actually only had one other candidate on this cycle. And she's running in Dallas. Jessica's very, 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 very impressive. Jessica Mason. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
She's really great. Seema Hernandez has really been supporting her a lot, which means something because Seema isn't even necessarily always the biggest fan of AOC. So for Stina to believe in someone is a big deal.
No, she's a tough judge of character. And if you pass her bar, then you must be doing good things for the people.
and she likes Brittany on Staten Island too. And Brittany I thought Brittany looked really good anyway, but knowing that Seema supports Brittany is a big deal.
It's fantastic that she's running. Staten Island is a very tough place. It's a very, very tough place. My mother-in-law lives there, so
I think she's
one vote.
I think she's onto something though, because I noticed this in 2020. So I've already forgotten his name, fortunately. Eventually it'll come back to me, I'm sure. Max. That's it, Max Rose. See, I already remembered it again. But Max Rose went to a Black Lives Matter rally and was really trying hard to win over the Black Lives Matter people and was called out for it by Nicole, I can't pronounce her last name. Malliotakis. Yes, Nicole Malliotakis, who ended up winning. And he totally caved on it. He threw Black Lives Matter under the bus. He said a bunch of stuff that wasn't true about stuff he said to them and really just became a train wreck. And so if there's anybody who was really beaten by defund the police, it's Max Rose, and only because he completely fell apart when challenged to say no. You
know what? I'm going to push back on that a little bit because while yes, what you're saying is true, let us just not pretend that he was like this super fighter for the people.
He wasn't.
Solvers Caucus member. He also defended expanding detention centers, the concentration camps.
I will be honest. If Brittany wins, I will think that it was a good thing that Max lost to Nicole, because there's that little difference between Max and Nicole and that much difference between Max and Brittany.
No kidding.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm excited. I think, the Brooklyn piece of that district will be great. But Staten
Island's tough. I know.
My mother-in-law lives there, and we haven't just since COVID has lightened up a little bit. We've been out to see her a couple of times, and there are still large Trump banners on her block and everywhere else.
Oh, so sure.
It's still up on the cars, on the houses. So
I don't think the Trump banner. See, I think the Trump banner hurts your Max Rose more than it hurts your progressive.
Possibly, because
And the reason I think that is because when Trump won, he didn't win just by saying all sorts of nasty things about Mexicans or Muslims. Sure, he said those things, but he also told people they were going to have wonderful health care and that he was going to be bringing their jobs back.
Mm-hmm.
And people voted for Trump because he was telling people they were going to have wonderful health care and he was going to bring the jobs back.
I agree with you, but have you ever spent time in Staten Island? Because while that is true,
No, I know.
Places, and you know, this is something that I said, you know, till I was blue in the face, like where Democrats would say, I can't believe anyone would vote for Trump. Like, why? When parties have left them behind for so many years, all of a sudden you have this outsider who's saying, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to bring your jobs back. I'm fighting for the working class guy. No one else was talking to these people.
Exactly.
The Democrats certainly weren't. So, you know, I do think that there's some validity to what you're saying, but I'm going to push back from the Staten Island piece. However, you know, the Brooklyn piece of it hopefully can push her over the edge. Because if Max could win, I think you're right. I think that there's some room there. But the Staten Island portion is very, very tough. Let me just share this with you. I don't know if you heard about this. So they had Trump birthday parades. They're very Blue Lives Matter crew. There was a bar during COVID in Staten Island that refused to shut down. So because of, you know, Governor Cuomo's orders, they decided that they were going to pour free drinks and allow people to come in without masks at the height of COVID. So the police came to shut them down. A man ran over a police officer in a car in Blue Lives Matter country. And then that man was just released. Like, no, you can go home. That is Staten Island. So not all of it, of course, but you know, the tougher parts of Staten Island are, it's a different place.
Once upon a time, that was Queens.
Yes, and change unfortunately takes some time. Right?
I know.
So,
I know. I'm just saying is that, you know, change does take some time, but also change can happen really fast when you least expect it.
There are communities in Staten Island that have changed, and I feel confident that Brittany is probably all over those communities and, you know, focused in Brooklyn, and I think that could be enough. Sure. But you know, it's Staten Island is not Middle America. It is
I know. Staten Island is very, very traditionally, I know.
Yeah, in a certain kind of way.
Well, the people, the people on Staten Island are on their own smaller island away from the people on the bigger islands. That tells you something.
I will just say for my part to a lot of this that, like, you know, I obviously empathize with the frustrations that people feel with our political system. But I do think it's important to keep grasping at the levers of power when possible, because I think that, you know, people's lives are on the line when this stuff is being decided. And as someone who has seen, you know, people die from really preventable shit, being poor, whether it's addiction or lack of opportunity or different lack of mental health care or different things, or being, you know, poverty drafted into the military and dying in the military. We can do better by people. And it's great if people want to step up in their communities like you do, Melanie, and try to make that happen, even if it is sort of stepping into the very mouth of the dragon and just dealing with the consequences of however bad that's going to be. Obviously, you know, anybody who knows me knows that I'm kind of an anarchist. I'm very far left, and I certainly believe in, you know, power outside the system as well. But I also think that it's worth noting that, you know, the systems that be would not have pushed back so hard and done everything they could if there wasn't something to be gained for us here.
That's true.
And
they wouldn't have tried to stop us so hard if there wasn't something to stop.
Exactly. If it was just okay, if they had completely 100% to the bone co-opted everything, then they would have just let Bernie be elected, and Bernie would be the one doing all of these horrible policies right now. Because if they had co-opted him and this movement and everything to that extent, then they would have just let Bernie be elected, knowing that it would have pleased a lot of Americans.
So
And just made him into the puppet instead. But they knew that they couldn't have the perfect puppet that they wanted. And it's so funny because Bernie would have still given them so much. He would have still conceded so many things to wealth. But he wasn't perfect enough. And so they still were scared of that. And they had to push back on that. And they had to push back on not just him, but hundreds of races across this country.
Yes.
Because they were so nervous. And I think that if we allow them to completely disillusion us from that, then we have absolutely fallen for COINTELPRO and everything that they want.
I'm asking tough questions, but I support Melanie. I'm going to push for her when in this primary. I want her to know that too. I totally support you.
Thank you.
I know you and I believe in you.
Thank you. I mean, look, the tough questions are important, and we need to have these discussions, right? Because I think it makes us better, right? It makes us better as a movement when we dissect, the ins and outs of the pieces, and it's important to see, the candidates who did make it. What did they do well, and maybe where did they fall short? And I'm not interested in really blasting candidates. I don't think that's not really my way. But I would be interested in say, okay, so how can we change that when more of us get there, and how do we move forward? Because I think Kennedy, you said we're just out of fucking time, right? On so many issues, we're out of time. We can't waste a single second.
And this is where I go back to co-option, and I will say that there are levels of co-option, and the levels are important because the system doesn't take Bernie Sanders and turn Bernie Sanders into Bob Menendez. Mm-hmm. That's not how the system works. You can't make someone something they're not. What the system does is find little ways to make Bernie Sanders feel like he's doing enough for him to go along with the rest of the system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The system doesn't come to Jamal Bowman and Rashida Tlaib and AOC and say, you have to vote yay. They come to Jamal Bowman and Rashida Tlaib and AOC and say, well, could we convince you to vote present? Mm-hmm. And those levels of co-option are important to be aware of, because they're not going to come at somebody who presents themselves as honest and progressive with, I'll give you $10,000, you vote for this. They might be able to do that with some centrist, but that's not what they're going to try with a new progressive most of the time. Mm-hmm. They're going to try to get your support on something that there's no reason for you to not support, and give you some little thing, and then ask you to be there for them for something big that you might not otherwise agree with. Mm-hmm. That's how I hate to put anybody on the spot. That's how so many progressives ended up being in a position of having endorsed Scott Stringer when his scandals broke, because he had done little favors for people. And when the time came that he wanted a bigger favor from them, they felt like they had to be there. And then they were standing there when the scandals broke. Mm-hmm. And that's how they co-opt you if they think you're honest.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, Chris, you're not entirely trying to play hardball. I'm also not entirely trying to play softball, but I also know Melanie, and I know that running for office is horrible, and that you went through plenty of terrible things in this last cycle. And I think that just the fact that you're willing to run again is actually wildly impressive, honestly. And so, to the people out there that feel like they can never vote for a Democrat again, listen, I get it. I've been there. After I voted for Obama the second time, I was pretty much there. And in fact, I haven't voted for a Democrat for president since then. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I've been disillusioned about that part of the process. I vote in my local elections because I know who those people are and I know theoretically what they might deliver, but I don't know these federal knuckleheads that don't, they don't care about me, and that's obvious. And so I get it, but I think we should also be a little careful to not get on too much of a moral high horse about the things that we personally do sometimes as leftists. It's great if you feel like you're making the moral right choice when you do those things. I felt like I was making the moral right choice when I refused to vote for Joe Biden. And honestly, every day since then, I've just felt better about it. So So I think if that's how you feel, great, but don't necessarily feel like that's the morality that you need to apply to every single other person and every single other decision that they make. Because if someone's out there in Melanie's district thinking, you know what, I'm voting for a Democrat again this time, they might have a good reason. And you shouldn't necessarily just feel like every single person who makes that call is selling out the movement any more so than, they should treat you like shit if you can't if you can't cross that bridge anymore.
I kind of agree with that. There are some things that I think people who decide they want to stay involved with the Democratic Party shouldn't do if they want to stay involved with the movement. Attacking all your former best friends and telling them why they have to vote Democrat or they're horrible people is probably not a good way to stay with the movement if you decide to support Joe Biden. Just in case anybody who did that is watching, I just want to point out, you're a bad person. Sorry about the moral judgment there, Kennedy, but but that aside, no, I think that there has to be a certain amount of willingness to accept some of those other choices simply because nobody really knows what the solution is. I mean, so let's say, okay, we need revolutionary socialism. We need to overthrow the capitalist state. Okay, who's our Lenin? And everybody just sort of looks around because we don't have one. I know that there are some people in some various groups here and there who would say, it's me. But I don't think the Revolutionary Communist Party, as much as I believe that people should talk about Bob Avakian and remind people that he's not dead yet, I don't think the Revolutionary Communist Party is going to overthrow the capitalist state anytime soon. As much respect as I have for the Socialist Equality Party, as much as I really like Joseph Kishore, as much as I will always have Trotskyists on my show, I don't think the Socialist Equality Party is overthrowing the capitalist state next week. And with that in mind, then we have to think, okay, how are we going to operate within the system we have until then, while we try to reach that point, even if that's what we're talking about. And then, then you have to push for issues that matter to working people, because that's the only way you can organize working people around politics, is to go for what gets them out there. Healthcare, better wages, making sure that people can get enough food. Those are the things that we need anyway. Those are the things that we should be pushing for. That's what's going to create a movement, whether it elects someone or whether there's a general strike or whether people rush the White House and drag Donald Trump out and and set him on fire or something because he wins in 2024 and people can't take it anymore and have to overthrow the government. So whatever happens, we need to be ready. We can't just go through the motions. And that's really what I feel like. It's important to support people, not necessarily parties right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good sentiment. I totally understand the frustration as well. A lot of people are feeling let down right now. A lot of people are feeling deserted. And I think it comes from a place of both extreme passion and in many cases, just a hopelessness and a desperation even. So it makes sense that people feel that way. I guess I would just implore people that if they have the means to don't just sit and fester with it, like figure out what your place is and then take action, right? Because that's how we move the needle at the end of the day. And whether your needle is, electing the right candidate or your needle is building community power or pushing on a local level, if you just sit and fester, you feel terrible and it doesn't help at all, right? So I don't know, like obviously I'm a little bit biased since I'm running for office, but good Lord, I have to tell you, to Kennedy's point, like running for office is not, I think people think it's like, oh, this glamorous thing. Like you get death threats. People threaten you. They're constantly trying to tear you down, right? So it's kind of a scary place to be. For me, I mean, and I know many other candidates as well, like that's the only thing I can do to not like combust inside, because I feel so deeply that we need change. And you all know I have 3 babies. I have 3 children, and I look at them and I feel like everyone has their head in the sand, right? So this is why I push so hard. And I'm organizing all the time on a local level, on a state level, on a federal level. That's what I do. And I'm not saying that's what everyone has to do, but everyone should do something. And if you're watching this, you are engaged enough to do something. So just find what that is, whether it's running for office or it's something else. We have to collectively do something.
Even if it's just talking to the people that you interact with on a daily basis about politics. Mm-hmm. I mean, engage with people, get them interested in the idea that, communities should do things for each other and that rights come with responsibilities, and that the more rights you have because of your wealth, then the more responsibilities you have to society. And I think those things are important. And so and I think that it's good that people are engaging again. Mm-hmm. And that more people are starting to feel that way. I do believe that. I do think our representatives are way behind.
Polls would indicate you're right.
I would love for the polls to prove me right there. I mean, I would really, really love to see some of the things that I really believed were going to happen in 2020 happen in 22. But I don't. I also think that it's very important. It's very important to run. And I know the things that people say to candidates. I have seen some of the things that people say to candidates on Twitter. It's awful. It's worse when we're talking about women running for office, because, of course, we all know the sort of things people love to say to women on Twitter. And so I really respect the folks who are running. It's hard work. I wish that we had a political system where everybody could run in an actual progressive party that was committed to working class politics for the 90%. But that's not the system we have. And people, I've said this before. I said this when we had both a Democrat and someone who ran as a Republican on the show. people have to run however they have the best chance to win. If there's somewhere where an independent has a good chance, then yeah, sure, run as an independent or a green. If you're somewhere where you need to run as a Democrat to get a nomination to have a chance of winning, sure, run as a Democrat. And, you know, if you think that you can sell socialism by saying Jesus every 3 words, sure, run as a Republican. What can you lose? A guy in Kansas got like 6-7% in a Republican Senate primary, running on a socialist platform by inserting Jesus every few lines.
It's not a bad platform if you think about it.
Yes, no, this is the Matthew platform. Or the Matthew and Mark platform, if you want to be more accurate, since they have the same stuff in them.
You know, here's the thing. I think, you know, everyone likes to choose a team, right? And we're so polarized, particularly right now. One of the things that we were really successful with last year when we ran before COVID, we did a lot of house parties, we did a lot of door knocking, and we had conversations with people. And we didn't always lead with Green New Deal or Medicare for all, but we would talk about the policy. We would define the policy. We'd get them shaking their head. And then at the end, we would say, and that's what Medicare for all is. And it was almost like a total mind explosion. What do you mean that's Medicare for all? That's not what I thought it was. I'm like, well, and then they would start asking questions. They're like, well, that's not what I thought it was at all, you know, and then we would win people over and get more people on board. And I think that's hard work, you know, and it's grueling, long hours. But for me, it was like some of the most rewarding work. And I think, you know, sometimes people say, why don't you just bang the doors, Green New Deal, Green New Deal? And it's like, because you don't reach people because they tune you out. And if you can get them there by having a conversation and then tell them what it is, it's, you know, I don't so much mind the method as long as they're supporting the policy that we need, you know, or that I believe that we need to, you know, to help working class people, to help our planet, to avert climate catastrophe. You know, we have to bring people along. And I think to be naive to the fact that we are so polarized is not going to get us anywhere, right? We have to find a method that works. Because I do believe that most people, and I'll say this, and this might come back to bite me one day, but I think even many of those people with the big Trump flags, right? If you could really reach them and you could give their family health care so that they never had to worry about health care, I think you'd get a lot of them on board too. We're just too much on our own teams right now.
Well, again, Trump promised people health care and jobs. Yes, he said a lot of nasty things about immigrants too. And sure, there are some people who did support him because of the nasty things he said about immigrants. However, the nastiest person to support Trump because of what he said about immigrants, Richard Spencer, turned around and said he was going to probably vote for Biden in 2020 because Trump hadn't been able to manage the Black Lives Matter riots, and he thought Biden would do a better job of handling protests. And Biden is kind of trying to prove him right. So that's a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and put final thoughts out there because I'm conscious of the fact that it's almost 11:30 at night for Melanie, and I appreciate her being a good sport. Does anybody, Melanie especially, does anybody have any final thoughts?
Listen, I'm just really grateful to be here, to see you all. Thanks for giving me this opportunity tonight to spend a couple hours with you all talking policy. It's really nice to be in this space, in this company. I would say, you know, to your audience, shameless plug. If you resonate with some of the things that I'm saying, follow me on Twitter. I'm at D'Arrigo Melanie, D'Arrigo for Congress on Instagram and Facebook. Would love for you to follow along. We're running a grassroots campaign, so even if you can pitch in a couple of dollars, that would be amazing. We had a really good launch day, but you know, the unfortunate viability that you have to hit. We're trying to raise $100,000 by the end of this month. It is not easy. And I would just, my final parting words is that don't give up. Don't give up on the system. I know that it's daunting. I know that there are days where it feels like we should just go under the blanket and not come out. But things will never get better if we give up, right? Only by pushing, only by challenging will we move the needle. And I know it seems like it's taking too long, because it is, but by giving up, we lose everything. And we are not in a position where we can lose everything. So keep going, take a rest when you need to, but then get back in this fight, because we need every single one of you.
I am going to put this up here because Dylan has been trying to ask this all night, and I have an answer for Dylan, and I'll take you off the hook. Dylan, Shannon Watts didn't endorse Melanie because Shannon Watts takes money from Michael Bloomberg and Melanie doesn't.
I mean,
I
did get a distinction, a gun violence. So I'm a member. I do a lot of gun safety organizing, common sense gun safety legislation. I did that for years, and both my opponent and I got a gun safety distinction. But yeah, we didn't get the endorsement. Maybe this time we'll see. I don't know. I don't know. You know how all this works. It can be tough. There is a political angle. And just to circle back real quick, I know we're on time, but even from a lot of the unions, I heard, well, we really love what you stand for, but we've got this relationship, so we can't. I'm hopeful this time with our momentum. Again, shameless plug, we were endorsed by 6 organizations on our launch day. Major organizations, Moms in Office, Empire State Indivisible, Brand New Congress, National Organization for Women, Her Bold Move, and Progressive Women of New York. And we raised $50,000 in 12 hours. So I think we're in a different position this year. It's all grassroots funded money. There's nothing else there. So, and there won't be. It'll be a hard slot. But that's okay. That's really important to me. I think if we can keep it up, I'm hoping we'll be able to pull some of the, more traditional organizations that may not have looked at us otherwise. I think this is going to be a different cycle.
I think that makes a difference, definitely. I had a strong feeling that both Moms in Office and Brand New Congress would endorse you again, but it makes me feel very good to know that they've both done so out of the gate. Good for Simona and Corey.
And actually the first candidate of the cycle to be endorsed by all of those organizations. So it was, it was really humbling, and it's really exciting. So I look forward to
this makes you, now keep in mind, at one point, the only person that Brand New Congress had endorsed last cycle was AOC. So now you're the AOC of this cycle.
I don't think I can see money, but so we'll
no
see.
Pressure. No pressure. And no, maybe Moms Demand Action will come around this time. Maybe there are things that matter to Shannon Watts more than the Bloomberg money. I would like to think so. Maybe she'll even unblock me one day. We'll see.
Well, when my opponent lied and said he had their endorsement, she actually did tweet out that, in fact, it was not true. So I felt like that was something.
That's good. No, that's definitely good.
And I got an apology. I mean, he lied about a lot of things. So I have to give them credit. They did correct the record publicly, which,
that's good.
Surprising. Mm-hmm.
That's definitely good. Kennedy, any final thoughts?
I just want to say again, that the disillusionment is real. I get it. But, we all just have to try to do what we think is best in this terrible situation that we're in. There are no clear answers right now. If there were, then we'd all be doing that. Melanie, I just really want to thank you for your time, and thank you not just for your time being here tonight, but thank you for literally giving up years of your life to do this often somewhat thankless political work. And so at least, Chris and I are here saying thank you tonight.
Definitely. No, thank you for running again. You're one of the people who I was hoping would run again and who I was trying to decide whether or not to push to run again. So I'm glad you took the decision out of my hands.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
I have been pushing someone else to run again, and they were one of the people who I now know, but I can't talk about, is running again. So I'm happy about that.
I'm excited. Can't wait to talk to you.
Another person I was pushing to run again definitely isn't. So that's disappointing. But we'll see what happens.
We'll see. Well,
But so my final thoughts are short and simple, and it's a combination of thinking about the border and thinking about what happened to Kennedy's friend's kid, and it's short and simple. My final thought of the night is fuck Nazis. And with that said, everybody have a great night. And from Kennedy, from Melanie, and from myself, thanks for joining us, and I'll tweet at you.